Hi there. Well, for this week's newsletter, as you can see, I've changed from the warm tropical climes of southern Thailand to here in the Austrian Alps, where the weather is a little chillier and they've got a ton of snow. So if you're thinking about a ski trip this year, I can highly recommend Austria. They've had some of the best snow conditions in years. But the topic of this week's video newsletter is what makes a group travel experience so special, particularly the ones that we do at Wheel and Anchor. So there's a couple of things that go into that. First of all, obviously the choice of destination is a critical one. And like you, I spend a lot of time reading travel articles in newspapers, magazines, as well as collecting information from my network of people around the world, which of course includes people like you, members of Wheel and Anchor, hearing your travel experiences, the kind of things that you've enjoyed doing in the past is part of what influences where we decide to go with our tours at Wheel and Anchor. Of course, once we've decided where it is that we're going to go, then as the old saying goes, half the fun is getting there. And in this day and age, organizing the travel to and around a destination is probably the most challenging part of coordinating any trip. I'll be honest, the airlines don't make our lives terribly easy anymore, but we do our best to find the optimal routing and the most efficient timing to get from point A to point B. There's certainly a ton of options out there, as I'm sure you've realized in your own research and planning of travel, and for us the challenge is no different. And once we're in the destination, how we get around, of course, is a critical part of the planning of any tour. I like as much as possible to use local transportation methods. For example, in our upcoming trip to Japan, a lot of companies will tour around using buses and coaches, but of course the way that most people get around Japan is using the infamous bullet trains. And so I'm a big fan of train travel myself, and so we do our best to incorporate traveling by train, by ship, and by road wherever it's necessary to get around the destinations. Once we figured out all the transportation, then of course the whole flow of the program is of paramount importance, because on one hand we want to see as much as we can, but we don't want to feel rushed along the way. So for us it's always about looking a combination between what things we do together as a group, where we can avail ourselves of local guides and buses to make that experience both cost efficient and enjoyable, but at the same time allowing a lot of time to explore on our own, because that's often when the magic happens on tours, is when we are simply meandering around some village or city and we happen upon a little alleyway or a street where we uncover some shops, or simply an experience in a cafe that we might not otherwise have had if we're moving around with a group. So the flow of the program is a big part of what I do to curate each one of our tours to make them particularly amenable. Of course, the big part of the planning is the choice of accommodation, whether you stay in a 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star hotel. And there's so much information online now that who knows what's truly accurate. A lot of us, myself included, go to sites like TripAdvisor to try to get an indication of what any place would be like. But what I find is that there's so much information available that who knows what is truly accurate or not. So therefore, I prefer to rely on my own experience for places that I've stayed at, or people whom I can really trust to say that the experience is going to match the expectations of what I'm looking for and what our members expect. I can say that there's been occasions, much like here in Austria, where I've stayed in a 3-star hotel and the experience would be equivalent to a 5-star in any other part of the world. So the accommodation is obviously a big part of what goes into the detailed planning of any group travel experience. And once all that detailed planning and coordination is done, we add up all the line items and we come up with a final price tag, something I'm certainly very sensitive to because travel has become very expensive, particularly for us Canadians. But there's a lot that goes into the price when you consider all the individual elements that are included. I'm looking at developing a number of new programs that are geared towards a bit of a lower price point, but at the same time delivering a fantastic experience. And that's part of the magic that we bring into our programs at Wheel and Anchor, is that we have something available at higher price points, and soon we're going to be having a lot of new programs at a little bit more reasonable price levels. I hope that gave you a little bit of an insight into some of what goes into the planning and coordination of our special group travel experiences here at Wheel and Anchor. Our list of events coming up is growing rapidly. Veronica's been working super hard at creating events both in the Toronto area as well as across Canada, and a few events, as I mentioned last week, that I'm going to be participating in down in the US at the beginning of February. On February the 7th, don't forget, is our upcoming webinar about Spain and Portugal and our program along the Atlantic coast that's happening this coming October. So if you haven't signed up already, I look forward to seeing you there. And in the meantime, I look forward to catching up with you next week on my next stop in Tuscany, Italy. In the meantime, happy travels.